to another episode of Binder. I'm recording a couple of these today, but obviously I will distribute them weekly. This is just, as the holidays approach, it's difficult to, be able to make the time to do these kind of things. So, again, this is Blind Indie Novel Dates for Entertaining Reads. Our current blind date is with a political intrigue fantasy. Trust no one. People in power can't be trusted. All is not what it seems. A dash of romance, unique setting. Words disappear when writer dies. What? The writer dies? Okay, that's all that I get to know. Tropes or whatever, just special little bullet points to know about the book without actually like reading a blurb or seeing a book cover. So color me intrigued. The writer dies. Okay. So this is, let's start with it has a prologue. So we'll start with that. Prologue. Pale sails in the distance. Jana, roughly 180 years ago. The smoke from the morning's porridge was thin and white and wispy in the morning chill. Looked a bit like spirits from the other world trying to break in. A poor omen. Jana's bones ached the way they did when a squall was coming, yet there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and it was clear over the sea. The ominous signs were stacking up, scratching her crooked back. She hacked her phlegm and spat on the ground by her fire. She was the witch of Loma, the goddess of shadows, and the village would look to her for guidance, but she was at a loss. Mentally, she ran through the usual list of events impacted by prophecy. The harvest had been good. Fish were still biting. There hasn't been a war, no plague, no sightings of monsters or demons, no natural disasters. But the evil proponents wouldn't stop. Even the followers of the goddess of the sun and wilderness were starting to take notice. Tonight, she would dance around the fire, drink the delics, and consult the goddess. She had already gathered the bitter berries and mushrooms the day before. She only needed the blood of a female deer. Of course, the chief didn't want her to consult the goddess at all. He was afraid of the consequences. Might as well have been from the reach for all he understood about the goddesses and their ways. Something was coming, and Jana was the type that liked to prepare or, at the very least, look what was coming in the eye. No one from Clithwittor should ever shrink from a challenge. They hadn't in their fights with the Reachmen. They hadn't in their fights with the Reachmen years ago. They hadn't in their fights with the Reachmen years ago, and they wouldn't start now. This sentence needs to be adjusted. She stretched and cracked her back. She was getting old, and it wasn't for her to be hunting deer for the Drylix ritual anymore. Maybe Bartow had one for sale. Failing that, she would always get young Padre to hunt one for her. Whatever the method, she was sure there was. Sorry about that. Taking a sip of water there. She was sure there was a female deer out there she could get the blood from. When her mother forced her to drink the Jelix for the first time, she was 11. I wish I knew how to pronounce that name. Normally I go and I look up words that I don't know how to pronounce if they are real words or have a style guide so that I can do this. I have no idea how to pronounce this. I'm just kind of winging it. I'll look this up later. For the first time, she was 11. Back then, Jana almost vomited, but she came to enjoy the taste over the years. It tasted like wisdom and enlightenment. It was the after effects she didn't care for. Loma did not like being bothered. Calling on the goddess's name was running a risk at the best of times. Every time Jonna called on Loma, she felt a little older and a little weaker. She would need to pass the gift on soon, but she had no daughter. On the way to the village, the stones and rocks that littered the path were a pain to walk over. During her walk, she had to remind herself that she chose this for herself, and she preferred living on the outskirts of civilization. This morning, the distance to town felt daunting. She grasped breath at the top of the incline she struggled up. Living among people caused too many headaches. Solitude may be lonely from time to time, but her time was her own, and she could live any way she wanted to. After the last bend on her way down the hill, she could make out the morning cook fires of Clithwitor. I wish I knew how to pronounce that too. Clithwitor. Shopkeepers were setting out their wares for the day. The farmers, hunters, and craft people were making their way to their places of work, field, forest, or workshop. Everyone went about their business. It was a simple existence, and it was an existence that was unbothered by fate. In the distance, she heard children playing and running around the town square. If it wasn't for the heap of omens, she could have said this was an average day. Bartow stood outside of his shop, smoking his pipe and watching Jonna's approach.
Coming for the deer blood then, Jonna?
He kept his pipe to one side of his mouth as he spoke. The smoke curled and twisted. It reminded Jonna of her breakfast. Of course, but how could you possibly know? She rolled her eyes. It wasn't surprising he guessed her purpose. Meat was not something she purchased on a typical day, and this was a small town. Word of the omens had spread. She could see her presence hadn't gone unnoticed this morning. Looking out from the windows of the gray stone buildings surrounding Bartow's butcher shop, the villagers stole looks at her and whispered, "A show. Let them watch."
Call it a premonition, then.
He tapped the mouth of his pipe to his head and smiled. And what is it that the mighty Bartow sees in the future? Her fingers felt around the coins. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be reversed. She's supposed to say, call it premonition then. Anyway, what about and what is it that the mighty Bartow sees in the future? Her fingers felt around for the coins she brought with her. Every year she seemed to have fewer to spend, and her purse became lighter as of late. Being a witch wasn't the most lucrative professions at the best of times. It wasn't the coin or the pleasure that kept her a witch, but she wasn't sure what it was. Maybe she was addicted to knowing things others didn't. Perhaps it was fear.
What do you see?
Oh, that's her. What do I see, He scratched at his beard and spat. Oh no, that was definitely him.
What do I see,
He scratched at his beard and spat.
I see a witch telling the town something they don't want to hear.
He brought the pipe back to his mouth and breathed the smoke, and blew it back out through his nose. Bartow already had the blood ready in a jar. He had been expecting this. Wow, Bartow, you are getting good at that. Ever think of being a witch?
I did, but I hear there's not much coin in it. Besides, I hear the current witch is a disagreeable madwoman.
Aye, best stay away from that sort, at any rate. Jonna couldn't help but chuckle. She counted the coins in her hand. She had enough. After exchanging coin for dole blood, she started the long trip home, ready to create the magical elixir. The path was as rough on the trip back as it had been getting there, blackened by dirt. The calluses on her leathery feet were thick and cracked. No matter how tough her feet were, sharp rocks still found a way to find the few tender places of her feet that still existed. Grinding the mixture into her mortar and pestle took a lot of work. The process was root. First, she had to mix the berries and mushrooms and crush them into a coarse paste. Then she had to stir in the deer blood until everything emulsified. The last thing for her to do was the re- was rest the mixture until nightfall. She would mix it again and again until the time for its ingestion and her prophecy. By now, the preparation was muscle memory. Oh, I'm being summoned. I'll pause this and return later. The lights flickering in my office are a telltale sign that I'm being summoned from the outside world. And we're back. It was my daughter on the phone with grandma. Anyways, back to the story. I actually looked up how to say that word, and it's drailage. I'm now happy about that now. It makes me so much more happy to say this. Okay. So she would mix it again and again until the time for its ingestion and her prophecy. By now, the preparation was muscle memory. After she made the drailage, she looked at her arthritic hands. It had been many years since she took her place as the Witch of Loma. Much had changed in that time. She still remembered the days of her childhood, ashes that floated in the breeze and the pale yellow tinge of the sunlight as it tried to pierce the clouds of debris. That had been the end of the span of ash. It was easier to reach out to Loma with the ritual now, but her messages weren't always straightforward. With any luck, tonight she would make heads or tails of what the goddess would say. Otherwise, she would pay the price for nothing. Her own mother had withered away from overusing this same ritual. Nothing was ever free. Even the ancients knew that goddesses would never give you something for nothing. Sacrifices needed to be made. Devotion had to be proven. Jana's life was what was required of her. She set the mixture aside for the moment and decided to tend her garden until sundown. She had to take what enjoyment she could out of life, while she could still take it. Those few moments might be all she ever got. She could have been a farmer in another life, but this life was the one she was living. That night she set a fire on top of her hill and started the dance of shadows. The night disappeared and blurred into the flicker of flame as she slowly swayed. The gyrations and twists were obscene that in that way the things the occult were in that way the things of the occult always were. She increased her speed as the fire seemed to move with and join her dance. Tongues of flame that reached and stretched in the black expanse of the night sky. At the height of the wild dance, she picked up the drailage and quaffed it entirely in one gulp. Within a few heartbeats, she moved into the cracks between space and time. She was in the realm of the goddesses. Even if she traveled to that realm every day of her life, it always felt like the first time. It was seeing and not seeing, hearing and being deaf, and it was both a sense of feeling and numbness. The realm of the goddesses was both everything and nothing at the same time. Jana found herself both within and without, among the goddesses, but not of them. Jana swallowed hard and addressed Loma the way her mother taught her. I come before the goddess of shadow, seeking knowledge. Jana spoke confidently. Her mother always said you could show no weakness before Loma, or she would refuse to answer. And maybe worse. Speak, child, and ask what you will. Her voice was the barest, hoarse whisper, soft even in the sacred halls of Loma called home, either due to the quiet nature of Loma's voice or Jana's worsening hearing. She had to strain to hear her voice now. The years had not been kind to Jana, but Loma remained the same, immutable. Her shadow, a swirl of darkness, appeared before her. Dark sister, your child wishes to know about the recent omens. What is it they portend?
So, you ask the future.
Yes, merciful shadow. Jana bowed her head in reverence.
Many-headed serpents from the sea will devour you. Beware the white-winged serpents.
Jana considered this, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense. Typical. She scratched her head. Was it a literal serpent or metaphorical? When would this happen? It was hard to say if the figurative or literal meaning of that message was worse. Before she had the chance to ask several clarifying questions, she woke near her fire, head aching and the taste of vomit on her lips. The following morning reminded her of a night with too much wine. She was dehydrated, and every bone in her body hurt. The sun oppressed her from the sky, taunting her like it knew and hated the darkness she lived in. Soon, she would have to give this life up, or risk going too far down the path as her mother had. Perhaps there was a young woman in the village interested in this type of living, though even when she put a good thought to it, none came to mind. It was a bit of a hard sell. She was born into it, but who would make this choice? She got up, ate breakfast, kept it down, and made the journey to town. Prophecy attracted rabbles, not audiences, not gatherings. Rabbles were the only groups willing to hear the words of a witch. Jana stood on some stacked boxes in the center of town, much as she had the other time she had a word from Loma. In the back of the rabbles were the other priestesses, followers of Sina, the sun goddess, scowled at her in contempt. Followers of the wilderness goddess Guma hid their contempt better. It wasn't close to as obvious, and Jana appreciated that about them. She cleared her throat, and the people quieted. Even in her old age, Jana still commanded a lick of respect. She cleared her throat one more time for good measure, pausing a moment to consider her words. She started. Listen to the words of Loma, the shadow that sees, the dark that hears, and the goddess that waits. She looked over the assembled people and noticed even the chief was in attendance. Good to see that these folks were looking at the signs. She tells me many-headed serpents will come to devour us from the sea. Beware the white-winged serpents. She stopped and waited. There was a pause this time before the grumbling started.
That's it.
What's that now?
Serpents? Rich speaking gibberish again. Come on, let's go home.
Jana hopped off of her boxes and prepared to return to her hut. The village couldn't make sense of the prophecy, which was fine because she knew no more about it than them. As she left, she could hear the displeasure of the crowd. It didn't matter if they liked her, and their displeasure was none of her concern. Her business was to speak the truth. Even the chief gave her a mocking look. Then a voice pierced the collective disapproval. It was a child running towards them from the direction of the shore. Everybody, quick, look, huge ships. The entire village made its way to the water. In the distance, they could see 6 ships, grander and more massive than any of them had ever seen before. Each arose from the horizon with huge, white sails. Flying from the masts of the ships were flags, each decorated with a face contained within a bursting sun. See? White wings. Bunch of faces. You get the picture. Jana wasn't the one to rub being right in the village's face, but things were pretty obvious. The villagers stood on the shore as they watched the ships make their approach. She heard the call to arms coming from the chief. There was panic in his voice. Jana made her way home, trying not to smirk too much as she left. The next morning, Jana could see smoke coming from Clithwitor, but it wasn't cooking fires. A year later, it was no longer Clithwitor, but Tristan's Keep. And that is the end of the prologue. And our blind date today was The Traitors We Are, Crown and Tide, Book 1 by Michael Roberti. So, political intrigue fantasy, trust no one, and a dash of romance. So, that's just the prologue. So, obviously, we didn't get to like meet the main characters or anything like that. But the Traitors We Are, Crown and Tide, Book 1 by Michael Roberti. That's the book. It sounds great. And a little note is that book 2 of this series will be releasing in February, so real soon. So I would definitely get on reading that if you enjoyed this prologue. Look in the show notes, click like, subscribe, and I look forward to sharing with you some more indie novel blind dates to find your next entertaining read. Um, I enjoyed it. I think this is pretty intriguing so far. Obviously, we only got the prologue, but well done. Well done, Michael. Okay, so I know I'm really horrible at like signing off and getting to it, but bear with me. Basically, Um, I'm working through the list of authors to share with you guys some more reads. If you don't like these particular tropes, you can always just wait until next week when I put forth another one. I try to kind of have the um the podcasts have like varying different fantasy tropes to intrigue you. So if you like fantasy, you like science fiction, you like fantastical adventures, be it romance or otherwise, then this is definitely the podcast for you to find your next indie novel date. Stick with me, and I look forward to having you join me next time. And that's it for this episode of Blind Dates with Indie Novel, um, Blind Indie Novel Dates for Entertaining Reads. Yep, I can't even explain my own podcast, guys. Anyways, until next time, I hope I didn't blow up that one up too much. Bye, guys. Wait, did I even say who I was in this podcast for this one? My name is Stevie, by the way. S.M. McCoy. I write fantasies and science fiction novels, as well as a couple smart novels, but let's not discuss that yet. I'm a narrator. Yep. Ends up covering it. I just want to help people out. Yep. God, Stevie, just shut up and end the podcast already. Okay. I understand.